Welcome to Carrick Vineyard, a place of hope where lives are changing. We're a church in the heart of Carrick passionate about seeing people's lives changed by the love of Jesus. The following message was given at one of our Sunday services.
Thank you, Paul, for that. Also, thank you for this opportunity. It's just a real privilege to do this, and even though it's like literally terrifying, it's also a real privilege, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and to share some things that I think God really wants us to hear today, particularly. So thank you so much for that. Yes, I've been coming to this church for a really, really long time, I think. Probably like maybe 13, 14 years, Lynn, is that right? More than that? Less, that's okay. Feels like 13 or 14 years. Why do we keep coming? Well, we feel that this church is a really safe place, and it's a real family here. And I think we've kind of seen a little bit of that this morning, and it was really lovely to hear just the impact that Philip has had on the women. But we feel that that's the case with this church generally. The impact that it has on people and the safe place that it is something that you cannot take for granted, and is very easy, I think, also to lose. So that's a little bit about what I want to talk about today. It was surprising to me, I think, which part of Mark's Gospel, Mark 9, chapter 9, that I was going to cover. I was actually absolutely sure that I wasn't going to do the Transfiguration, but I was going to do the demon-possessed boy bit that comes after that, mainly because I actually did preach that here before. Well, speak about it. I actually don't think I preach, but I did speak about it here before, so I have all the notes. But I actually have to apologize as well, because I was supposed to be speaking last week on Mark 8, but well, basically I don't read emails. So Chantel was actually supposed to be speaking today, and no doubt we would have got some great stuff on the Transfiguration, or the famous line in verse 23, where it says, all things are possible for him who believes. I think that would have been a good one to cover. Or the other famous line in verse 24, where the man says to Jesus, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. And that would have been another amazing thing to cover as well. I would really invite you to read those verses, those preceding verses, actually, and maybe look at them in your life groups, because there's so much gold there. There's so much in those. It's really actually hard to know where to start with some of that. But for the purposes of expediency, here's a very brief rundown on what happened before what I'm going to do, which is essentially Mark 30 to 37. But what happens before that? Jesus is leading his disciples to Jerusalem, and this journey marks a very significant shift in Jesus' ministry as he begins to focus on preparing his disciples for his impending death and his resurrection. So 6 days after Jesus predicted that some people there would see the kingdom of God with power, he takes Peter, James, and John up a mountain where he is miraculously transfigured before them. Moses and Elijah appear, and God speaks from heaven, and he tells them, this is pretty serious stuff, lads, and please listen to Jesus. Next, upon returning, Jesus' disciples, the ones on the ground that were kind of left behind, they're all baffled because they couldn't deliver a boy from demon possession. And Jesus steps in to heal the boy, stating that this kind can only be driven out by prayer and fasting, not by status, thereby telling us to practice the spiritual discipline of integrity, and how much more important that is than any given position that you might have. So, this is where we've got to. So here we go into verses 30 to 37. I think when I was reading it, and the reason why I decided that I wanted to do this bit was because my heart just started racing when I was reading these verses. I read the whole chapter a few times, and every time I got to verse 30, my heart was just quickening, and I knew that this was the section that I had to talk about today. I didn't really want to. As you know, I could easily have done the demon-possessed boy because I had all the notes. But I think this section is really important for our churches today, including Northern Ireland, and also particularly in the context of what we have found out about this week. And it's also pretty heavy, and it's also pretty challenging. And I hope that you will take it in love and as a reminder to keep this place a safe place, if that's okay. And also to practice spiritual discipline, I've written here. Not quite sure what I mean by that. So I'm calling it the Upside Down Kingdom. I'll just read it from this version, if that's okay. So let's read it together. So it's Mark chapter 9, and it's verses 30 just to 37, okay? They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were. That was because he was teaching his disciples. He said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be handed over to men. They will kill him. After 3 days, he will rise from the dead." But they didn't understand what he meant, and they were afraid to ask him about it. Jesus and his disciples came to a house at Capernaum. There he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" But they kept quiet. On the way, they had actually argued about which one of them was the most important person. Jesus sat down and called for the 12 disciples to come to him. Then he said, "Anyone who wants to be first must be the very last. They must be the servant of everyone." Jesus took a little child and had the child stand among them. Then he took the child in his arms. He said to them, "Anyone who welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And anyone who welcomes me also welcomes the one who sent me." The rest of the chapter just goes on about how we will be facing trials and how important it is to practice spiritual discipline. And then it ends with that we should have salt amongst ourselves and be at peace with one another. Is anybody looking forward to the new season of Stranger Things, by the way? Yes, thank goodness. Phew. I was worried people were going to look at me weird. I'm both excited for it and also sad, as it's the final one, I think. I don't know about you, but what I like about I don't know if you know about Stranger Things, don't you? It's on Netflix. It's kind of like a sci-fi drama set in the 80s. It's a bunch of kids kind of uncover a kind of an upside-down world where they kind of release evil forces into the world and they have to fight against it. Anyway, it has a very strong moral heart. If you ever watched it, it's a really, really powerful moral heart, this show. And I think a lot of young people particularly could really learn or be reminded of so much from watching it. I've pulled out a few of them. Things like the power of friendship. It's really big in this. Also, accepting of people who are different is really big in this. That truth matters even when it's hard. And also, healing comes from acknowledging and standing up for what haunts you, just to name a few things that are themes of it. If you've seen it, you'll know what I mean. It understands the importance of what I would call character in a person, by which what I mean is integrity and honor. Also, that found families can be real families. And I've written in red here, come back to this later, so if I don't come back to it, just remind me. Found families can be real families. And maybe the most important, I think, is ordinary people can do extraordinary things. No one, except for one character, I think, is a superhero in this, yet they all end up contributing in essential ways. Their heroism comes from how they choose to act, in this case with integrity and character, and not from any status. In many ways, this is the theme of what I'm going to talk about. In Stranger Things, there's a kingdom called the Upside Down, which is actually a parallel, gloomy, alternate reality. But in Mark, we see another upside-down kingdom, a bright one, wherein the one who desires to be first shall be the last and the servant of all. Mark 9:30-37 is one of those passages that exposes our hearts. Jesus is on the road to Jerusalem, on the road to the cross, and in many ways his disciples are on the road to personal ambition. He's talking about suffering, and they're talking about status. He's talking about sacrifice, and they're talking about ranking. This text not only reads the disciples, it also reads us, our churches, our motives, our ministries. Jesus said the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men in verse 31, but they did not understand this, saying, and they were afraid to ask him anything about it. They don't grasp this sacrifice that's coming, but they do understand the whole thing about who's best and where they sit in the pecking order. So Jesus kind of sits down, probably rabbi-like posture, and he proceeds to redefine what greatness means. So, first of all, the road to the cross conflicts with the road to self-promotion. Mark's gospel is famous for what one writer, I think, called the messianic path of downward mobility. It's the idea of you become a servant. When you're serving, you are a servant. And Jesus keeps predicting his suffering, not merely to inform them of what's going to happen, but it's to reshape them. But the disciples were afraid to ask him what he meant. Why? Because the truth would confront their agenda. And so Jesus asks to them, what were you discussing on the road? They fall silent because they were arguing about which one was the greatest. And this reminds me of the Land Rover. My dad had, you might actually have a similar story if you had a large family. My dad had an old farmer-style Land Rover, you know, those kind, the blue ones, with the blue with the white top, really basic farmer Land Rover. And the hierarchy of who got to sit where on long journeys was always debated over in our house. There was 3 seats up front. You had the driver, and then on the left there was 2 other seats. And I always wanted to be on the one right beside my dad, right beside the driver in the middle up front. I always wanted to be in that seat because that's when you felt most important, I think. You're always in front of the heater there as well, and you had access to, you know, that wee tray at the front where all the snacks were. For us, very randomly, it was pints of milk and Twixes. We always had Twixes. But the point is, me and my siblings would always fight to be there, as this was the place of prominence beside the driver. The one next to it was the seat by the door, and there was a big hole in the floor that you had to be very carefully put your feet either side of, and you could watch the road rushing by underneath, and you had to be careful not to drop anything, you know, down onto the road, or worse, if there was like something splashed up or shot up through the hole. The next worst spot was in the back, and that was you'd sit on the cold metal wheel arch, and there was no windows there except out the back, so you could never see where you were going, and your feet were usually resting on like a bucket of hammers or pot of paints or like a bag of cement or something like that. So you knew, like, if you got that front seat up beside the driver for that trip, at least you were better than your siblings. You were the best, and you could safely condescend to the poor soul in the back. If Mum was in the Land Rover, though, I was mostly on the wheel arch with my brother. And I think, like, a modern parable or modern parallel is the church celebrity problem. I don't know if you know what that means. Think about what happens when we get sidetracked feeling important, or looking good, or being in the in crowd. We become in danger of believing our own hype, I think, sometimes. We turn up to church all biz with ourselves and maybe blind to others. Have you ever been to an event? I'm not saying here, but But have you ever been somewhere where there's a lot of people and you're talking to someone who is not really meeting your eyes, and they're just kind of like looking over your shoulder to see who else is in the room that they'd rather talk to? If you've ever had that feeling, you'll kind of know what I'm talking about. My mate Colin always says, they're too busy being fabulous, which I think is the perfect description. We always live in a time, we also live in a time, I think, where celebrity culture has entered many churches, platforms, followings, personal brands, big churches. There's a leadership researcher called Edwin Friedman, and he has warned us that organizations often drift towards charismatic personalities instead of healthy systems. And he wrote a powerful book on leadership called The Failure of Nerve, and he said that it's more important how you show up than what you say. For us, this means that our actions are really only the things that define us. I'm saying all these things so that we can be, as a church, vigilant in the light of the many, many pitfalls that can happen. Social media has created like a performative type of spirituality where we can actually just post loads of stuff and make ourselves out to be the most holiest people in the world, and we can be seen to be worshiping without actually being devoted to anything apart from our image. This text that we're reading today in Mark 9 is blunt. Any version of Christianity that centers yourself, your position, it can't coexist with the crucified Christ. The disciples are trying to follow a Savior carrying a cross, whilst they're carrying their CVs, I think. So Jesus then, in 35 to 37, he redefines greatness. He gives a kingdom paradox, and he says, if anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. And this is not poetic language, this is reordering. The early church really knew this. In the apostolic tradition, one of the earliest church manuals, leaders are instructed that honor is not earned by hierarchy, but by hospitality and self-giving service. So that there's a child in the middle of this story. Jesus, he takes a child and he places the child in the center of the room. We all know that in the ancient world, children had no rights, they had no status, they had no social leverage. The child actually represents more than just a child in this story. It represents the bottom of the social ladder. Jesus is not merely saying in this story, be childlike, like maybe in other stories. What he's saying is greatness is measured by how you treat those who can't advance your agenda.
Say that again.
Greatness is measured by how you treat those who cannot advance your agenda. It is crucial that we practice this as a church. 2 Peter 1, verses 5 and 6 says, add to your faith virtue. And the Message translation translates it as character, which I think really nails it in my opinion. Add to your faith character. To character knowledge. To knowledge self-control. To self-control perseverance. And to perseverance godliness. Isn't it a sad indictment that you can often find people with character outside of the church? In the work world, we meet people all the time who understand the sanctity of a commitment. And in the church world, we often find people who are flakier than a 99 out of mods. And I'm including myself in that, obviously. So, not causing others to stumble then, this theme becomes explicit in the next section of Mark 9. But it's implicit here. If Jesus receives the vulnerable, then causing the vulnerable to fall is a grievous sin. So in our modern context, this can look like misusing authority. This can look like manipulation. It can look like narcissistic behavior. It can create church cultures of exclusiveness, comparison, and competition. It can foster celebrities and in crowds. It can mean neglecting those who have no influence. All ways of causing other people to stumble. When people pursue status, particularly leaders, the weak lose safety. Over the last couple of years, we've seen this happen, haven't we, in our own country, and we've seen what happens recently when the church takes its eye off the ball, to put it mildly. So I want this to be, for us, and I speak in grace, a warning for us to stay vigilant, to keep this place a safe place. When churches build platforms instead of people, the little ones are pushed to the margins. Jesus warns that humility is not an option, it protects souls. I actually did want to say this bit again. Jesus warns that humility is not an option, it protects souls. So a brief, quick word about children's ministry, because I would like to take that opportunity as children's minister. Jesus' action gives a subtle but strong message. Children are not an afterthought in the kingdom. They are the litmus test of our kingdom values. Good children's ministry is not babysitting, while adults do this spiritual work. It's spiritual formation at its most impressionable stage, a place where Jesus himself says he is present. Whoever receives a child in my name receives me, it says in verse 37. But notice, Jesus doesn't make the child the center of the church. He makes the child the center of the disciples' hearts. It must be a place where young hearts are shaped to see Jesus, not just a holding room so that adults can enjoy ministry undistracted. Children's ministry must be faithful and it must be safe, because it reflects our hearts as a church to nurture and keep the vulnerable safe. It reminds us that Jesus said that this is what we need to do in every aspect of our church. We protect one another, we protect each other, particularly the vulnerable. The Bible says that you will know us by how we love one another. That is so important, I think. So the danger of misaligned ambition. The disciples do what many of us do. They hide their motives. They keep silent when they're asked about it. But Jesus already knew their hearts. He draws a confession through his question. Today he asks us too, what are you discussing on the road? What are you chasing? Whose approval are you living for? Does your life reflect the cross or a desire for recognition? There's a freedom in servanthood. Jesus teaches that greatness is not found in being above people, but being beneath people with love. N.T. Wright notes in his work, Jesus and the Victory of God, that Jesus flips the world's pyramid upside down. The one at the top becomes the one at the bottom. And this is not humiliation, this is liberation, because when we stop trying to protect our status, we can finally love without calculating. We can serve without performing. We can teach without posturing. We can disciple without competing. We can contribute without striving. And we can ultimately protect the vulnerable. If anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. This is my favorite line. Greatness in the kingdom is about how you show up, not about how you show off. I was proud of that. Great, thank you. Greatness in the kingdom is not about how you show up. It is about how you show up, not about how you show off. So the child stands as a mirror and a measure. The passage ends not with the disciples, but with the child in Jesus' arms. So that child is our symbol that we want to take away. That child is the symbol of vulnerability, of humility, of dependence, of those without power, a symbol of those who can be easily overlooked or easily harmed, And Jesus said, how you treat them is how you treat me. So this is not sentimentality. This is the core message of this chapter of Jesus. This child is a window into Jesus' own heart here. He takes that child and he puts them in the middle of that room with those disciples who are arguing about status. And he says, how you treat the vulnerable is how you treat me. So the road forward, keeping an eye on the time, road forward, Mark 9:30 to 37 invites us to choose a road. The road of the disciples, which is competition, comparison, self-promotion, or the road of Jesus, humility and service and cross-bearing love. One leads to status and one leads to life. The kingdom Jesus is building cannot be populated by celebrities. It is built by servants. So today, Jesus stands in the center of the room again with the child in his arms, and he asks us, who will you be? Will you seek to be great, or will you seek to serve? Will you chase applause, or will you embrace the cross? Will your life cause the little ones to stumble, or invite them to see Jesus? In the upside-down kingdom, greatness is not what you achieve, but it's who you receive. They will know us by how we love one another. A couple of weeks ago, all those geese, those big Brent geese, were all in the car park. Those massive things up close, aren't they? Like when you see them up close, they're huge. They flew across the Atlantic Ocean, and they apparently don't fly in formation like a V shape like other geese do. They fly like a bit of a rabble, like in a bit of a sort of a random line, like a zigzag line. But the only way they can get to the other side, the only way they can complete that journey is by constantly supporting one another when they start flagging. And that's what we are here to do as a family. Remembered. Yes, found families can be real families too. This is our found family, and that's how we should be thinking. This is our found family, and it's a real family, and you will know us by how we love one another. Amen.
Gosh, that was flipping amazing. And so challenging. So challenging.
Yes.
And that's what we want. That's what we want for our church family. That's what we want for ourselves. That's what we want for our wider community. That's what our community need. We don't need the next thing, be the next thing, best thing, all that. It's as we go and we welcome the last, the least, the lost, as we wash the feet. You know, that's what we're about. That's what following Jesus, laying down our lives is about. So make cracker explanation of what Jesus taught his disciples, and we teach one another. Brilliant.
Thanks for listening to the Carrick Vineyard podcast. If you'd like to find out more about our church, please visit our website, carrickvineyard.org.